Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for innovating our way through the Alberta drought. I'm Karen Garth. I'm the Issues Communications Manager here at Alberta Innovates, and I'll be hosting today's panel discussion. I'll be taking us through a conversation on how research, technology, and best practices will help manage drought now and into the future. And if we have some time, we'll field a few questions from the audience afterwards. But first, I'd like to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge that we are coming to you virtually from Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territory and Métis Regions 3 and 4 in Alberta. I will highlight that the reach of this work and its activities influence and are influenced by all treaty territory and all Métis regions in Alberta, not just those from which we come to you today. This acknowledgement respects the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all Indigenous peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. I'll let each of the panelists introduce themselves. So let's start with Mark.
Oh, hi. Thanks very much, Karen. My name is Mark Summers, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Agriculture and Environment for Alberta Innovates. And I'm delighted to be here today, particularly leading up to World Water Day tomorrow.
Thanks, Mark. And now Pamela.
Hi, I'm Pam Duncan. I'm the team lead of environmental strategy in climate and environment at the City of Calgary. Environmental Strategies is a team that is leading water security initiatives across the city through projects such as the Drought Resilience Plan, Source Water Protection Plan, and Water Security Roadmap.
Perfect. And Margot.
Thanks, Karen. Margot Jarvis-Redelbach. I'm the Executive Director of the Alberta Irrigation Districts Association. That's the association that represents Alberta's 11 irrigation districts. We work to build partnerships and continue the activities of the districts towards sustainable water management.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone. I'd just like to take a moment and get Mark to give us a bit of a background on the issue of drought in Alberta.
Yeah, thanks again, Karen. So for anyone online or listening in that's really been living anywhere in Alberta this winter, it's been probably pretty obvious that we haven't had much snow at all. In fact, the snowfall from the last couple of days is quite welcome across the province. And while this may have been a welcome respite from the pitfalls of shoveling snow, it is a telltale sign that we're entering into, and frankly now in the midst of a pretty severe drought. And there is, rightfully so, widespread concern about the risks and impacts of water shortages on our quality of life as Albertans, our health, our environment, and even our economy. The province, broadly speaking, municipalities, industry operators, businesses, communities, and residents across the province, we're all impacted in some way by this drought. Now, I've been working for the last several years and continue to work either directly or indirectly on climate-related issues. In Alberta, we're talking here today, and of course elsewhere globally, the impacts of climate change will largely be felt through water in terms of where we get water, when we get water, and how much water we get. We've already seen sort of the other side of this coin with major flooding in 2013 in Calgary and High River and other places. We've seen it in terms of unprecedented wildfire seasons. Last year's wildfire season was the worst on record. And now we're seeing it in terms of severe drought conditions. We also know that this drought is hitting southern Alberta particularly hard. We have about 80% of Alberta's population in the southern part of the province, and unfortunately, only about 20% of the water. And if we zoom even one layer deeper, the Bow River, the Oldman River, the Red Deer River, which service extensive agriculture operations and significant industrial operations and large municipalities, these are likely to be the most acutely impacted. And so while I mention that, I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that we all have a right to clean, safe drinking water in Alberta, period. And we espouse that philosophy. And so with that said, again, I'm delighted to be here with you, Karen, with Margot and Pam to talk about this and to talk about how we can prepare for this drought and others to come in the future.
Perfect. That's a great way to set the scene. Let's jump a bit further into the issues. And Mark, I'm going to get you to speak a little bit about what you see the biggest issue facing the province when it comes to drought from Alberta Innovate's perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And sorry if it seems like I'm dominating the conversation so far, but let me start.
You won't be from here on in.
This will make sense in a minute, but I want to start by saying that I have the fortune and pleasure of working in the field of innovation. I'm here representing Alberta Innovates, as I said, an organization with more than 100 years of supporting and advancing innovation in the province of Alberta. And so, in terms of the biggest issues and challenges facing the province when it comes to drought, and this drought, we are going to face challenges with water supply for irrigation and farming in general, and we'll talk about that. We're going to face challenges with water supply for industrial operations. We need water for energy. We need water for fertilizers. We need water for manufacturing. We need water for municipalities and for businesses. This will affect energy security, food security, and of course, being water, it'll affect water security. Even the emerging hydrogen economy that we've all been talking about, myself included, is a big conference coming up next month, needs water, and a substantial amount of water. We face challenges keeping municipal water reservoirs at safe levels and ensuring all communities have access to safe and clean drinking water. So if I were to sum it up in terms of the biggest issue, I would say that in the face of constrained water supplies, the biggest issue is ensuring that water goes to the most critical water needs that we have in the province. And so bringing it back to Alberta Innovates, I almost forgot to close the loop there. Our biggest priority is ensuring the province writ large has the research and the knowledge and the tools and the technology it needs to have resilient water systems and processes in the face of this drought and future water challenges.
Thanks, Mark. Margot, let's talk a little bit about the agriculture side of things. How is Alberta's drought impacting agriculture in the province?
Yeah, so speaking directly more to irrigated agriculture, the sector that I represent, of course, we are facing a potentially extreme situation, a situation that we probably haven't been in for 20 years or more. And as Mark mentioned, right now it is about water supply and a potential water supply shortage. We are seeing, lower than average snowpacks, although there still is several weeks of time left to put some snowpack on and water equivalency in that snowpack. So we do have our fingers crossed, of course. And I'd say that, for irrigation districts, that water supply shortage is concerning. Districts do have large senior water licenses, and they potentially could call a priority on their senior licenses. Now, under the Irrigation Districts Act, it's important to understand that irrigation districts have a responsibility to their irrigators, but also a responsibility to maintain the economic viability of the district. A broad interpretation of that really extends to supporting the success of businesses, industry, and municipalities. Simply put, if you think of it as crops and water supporting crop product, which supports jobs through our value-added processing facilities, which then in turn supports our communities. So it's really important, and irrigated agriculture has for decades supported this value chain through crop product and water access to those other sectors. I guess what it really boils down to is, in extreme drought, how can irrigation districts really be leaders in the basin to encourage best conservation through all sectors to ensure that there's least impact to all. And that's one of the things that we've been striving to do over the last few months in order to lessen the impact to agriculture and the sectors that depend, irrigated agriculture and districts and the sectors that depend on irrigation districts for water.
Perfect. Pam, what are some of the issues facing the city of Calgary as a result of this drought?
Well, I think we heard some great information from Mark and Margot, and I wanted to echo that the City of Calgary is also taking the risk of this drought very seriously. You may have seen a press conference and release from a few days ago where our Mayor, sorry, we're on a light timer, and our Manager of Natural Environment and Adaptation outlined how the city is preparing plans, procedures, and communications to support Calgarians, businesses, and city operations to reduce water and work collaboratively with other water users and the GOA in the basin. But what I wanted to pick up on is something that is a challenge for Calgary, and it's something you may have heard before. Calgary is a big city on a small river. And in fact, because of this challenge, we've been preparing for drought for decades. So I kind of wanted to just take us back a little bit about those issues that we've been preparing for. We know that when the basin was closed for new water licenses in the 2000s, Calgary issued their first water efficiency plan in order to hold our withdrawals from the river steady and accommodate a population increase of over 500,000 people. We include multi-year drought as a climate hazard in our climate strategy. And we participate with the Alberta Water Council in drought simulation projects and their work. And just last year, we passed the first drought resilience plan for the city of Calgary. So that drought resilience plan is really helping us look to the future as well, so that we can continue to align our water demands with that changing water availability. So we are actually preparing a new water efficiency plan for next year. We're leveraging water reuse opportunities where we can and looking at that as a future technology. And we continue to advocate for upstream reservoir storage so that we know in that changing climate, we're going to see shifting snowpack and precipitation. And that upstream reservoir is important for managing that as well for water security.
Great. I want to talk a little bit about the role innovation is playing in all of this. So Pam, can you tell us a little bit about how research and technology is helping the city manage and plan with all of those pieces?
Well, what I wanted to highlight is a project that we've recently launched that is really key for research and technology. It's called the Water Security Roadmap and Water Reuse Assessment. So we're building from a watershed scale project that Margot is going to mention in her answers that looks at a wide range of water adaptation strategies across all of southern Alberta, but we're applying that same thinking to the local scale for the city of Calgary. So we're using the South Saskatchewan River Operating STROM mass balance model to compare options and evaluate benefits for future water adaptation strategies, specifically for Calgary. So this is a really great model for helping us do that sort of research investigation. Seeing how water moves through our watershed, we can look at snow and rainfall in the basin, storage reservoirs, how they work, withdrawals and returns from our major users, and ultimately how much water makes it out of our watershed to downstream users. So it's an innovative approach for the city of Calgary. It's really interesting to see that we now have baseline data where we can bring together the climate change, future population growth scenarios, and regulatory points of view to be able to ask sort of like what if scenario questions for the future, particularly under future climate states, because we know that Calgary, southern Alberta, we're experiencing now and into the future longer and deeper periods of drought and water shortages, and how that will impact our city. So we're going to be layering on those changes in population, potential different population profiles, new infrastructure operations to understand that future state and what the city needs to do to adapt. And sort of part of that innovation is and that research looks at where those thresholds, triggers are for the city of Calgary. What's that runway where we need to take action and how effective those actions are. So when I talk about, well, what are these actions? Actually, a major one that is part of this project is water reuse as an important technology that we're investigating. We're looking at existing examples. I'll highlight one is the Shepherd Energy Centre. It's Alberta's largest natural gas power generating facility. But what's important for our project is it uses reclaimed water from the city of Calgary's Bonnie Brook wastewater treatment plant for its process and cooling requirements. So we're applying that learning from that successful project. We're investigating other water reuse technologies and projects to apply more broadly and consistently over the city and into the future. So we're leveraging that sort of framework as kind of like an untapped potential where water reuse can diversify and enhance a drought resilient water supply portfolio for the city of Calgary.
Perfect. Margot, I know that you'll talk a little bit about the piece of planning that Pam was talking about. So I'll jump to you now and just ask, what's the most impactful thing being done from a research and innovation perspective to mitigate drought from an agricultural perspective?
Yeah, in the South Saskatchewan River Basin, it really is the investment by water stakeholders into the development of the South Saskatchewan River operational model, which Pam referenced. That computer model has really been created by and for the basin water stakeholders, and it really allows an investigation of potential water management decisions based on its assessment of historic and future flows, and particularly more recently adding potential climate change scenarios into the model, which has been very informative. It's a model that's highly trusted by the water stakeholders in the SSRB, and that's really because the data going into the model is vetted by those stakeholders, particularly the large license holders. So that model really reflects water management in practice rather than water management on paper. And there is a very significant difference there. We all know that there are water licenses. We've referenced here earlier that the large part of the basin is closed to new water license applications. And it's important to understand that water isn't managed based on just those paper allocations. Water is managed very collaboratively year to year, depending on whether we're in an average water season, a drought season, or a flood season. So the other benefits to the SROM model is that it's really easy to understand. So you don't have to have a lot of extra education or a PhD. There's a graphical interface, which makes it really easy for people who may not have great experience in models or models. And it is very easily modifiable on the fly. So it's perfect for collaborative-based decision making. People can sit around a table, throw some options out, have some discussion. The changes can be made, and within 3 to 6 minutes, it's coming up on the screen. And again, those people sitting around the table can easily see what the impacts are on some of the performance measures that are included in the model. So one really interesting thing is that this model has been developed and evolved over the last 20 plus years. And it is being used as an exercise to inform the current water sharing discussions that are ongoing in the SSRB. And, Pam did reference a drought simulation project that took place several years ago. The SROM model was the model that was used in that exercise with the water stakeholders. So it's really adding value. And I'd like to acknowledge Alberta Innovates for the funding assistance over the course of the evolution of that model to help the stakeholders have a tool in the toolkit that can help them really come forward and discuss what the scenarios are and stress test the system to see the what ifs and encourage planning based on those what ifs.
Great. And that sort of leads right into my question for Mark, which is, what role does Alberta Innovates play in helping to plan and manage drought?
Yeah, thanks very much. And I honestly, I'd like to pull on a couple of the threads that Pam and Margot already started talking about. But first, I might take a little step back and just talk very briefly about what Alberta Innovates does. So within the Alberta Innovates umbrella. We have 3 organizations, Seaford Technologies, Innotech Alberta, and Alberta Innovates. And what's really cool is between the 3 of us, we're a funder, we're a convener, we have research scientists, we have research facilities, we have testing facilities, we support entrepreneurs, and importantly, we work across the sectors of Alberta's economy. Because of this breadth and perspective, we have a pretty unique value proposition, and we have the opportunity to see sometimes connections or opportunities or even threats that sometimes others may not see. So this allows us to work strategically across industries, across technologies and innovation opportunities, and across timescales. And, I guess I just want to be clear, as a funder and a researcher and an innovation engine and all the things I talked about, the role of Alberta Innovates is not to be the emergency responder. I liken it to a house a little bit. If a disaster befalls a house, whether it's flooding or fire or whatever, we have amazing emergency responders to react in that time of crisis. What Alberta Innovates does is to help prepare the house, in this case, the house being Alberta, ahead of time with the latest and greatest innovation so that the house can better withstand and prepare for, and the emergency responders can better react to the emergency at hand. In this case, the drought that we're facing right now. And so just as a couple really quick examples to illustrate that point, one we've already been talked about a lot, but one of our core functions I mentioned is as a funder through Alberta Innovates. And I want to give a shout out to Kim Sturgis, one of Alberta's leading water voices at WaterSmart, and her team. And so as a funder, we were very early to work with WaterSmart and of course the government of Alberta and many other relevant interest holders to develop this model to understand the impacts of different actions have on the watershed. And so, what does that mean? Why do we care? Well, Margot talked about it a lot already, but among other things, I'll just mention that this model has change the way that dams, for example, among other things, the way that dams are operated and reservoirs are managed to help mitigate the impacts of high flow and low flow periods based on snowpack and other parameters. And this is an example of previous work that has helped us as a province to be in a stronger position now than we were 10 years ago. And a second quick example, this one looking forward, with one of our core functions as a researcher through Innotech Alberta. And again, I want to give a shout out to my colleague Bonnie Drozdowski and her team at Innotech, who is leading a project to explore alpine and surface and groundwater hydrology. And again, what does that mean? Well, Pam talked a little bit about this and sort of a different example. Why do we care? Well, the glaciers are receding, and really it behooves us to better understand the contributions and interplay of different natural water flows and water sources. So this is research that's happening now, and it will be used among with many, many other examples that we're all involved in to develop future water management strategies and policy. Again, this is not for this drought, but for future droughts and future water management challenges that we know will come.
Perfect. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that future resilience. Margot, what's the biggest priority for you when it comes to water management?
It's really about water management adaptation. So adaptation in the current system, and Pam touched on that a little bit, but I'll back up by just providing that, global population is set to increase, estimates of 11.2 billion people by 2100. Canada has been identified as one of 5 nations that can increase agricultural production to meet the food demand that's going to come with that increasing population. And arguably, Alberta is really poised to be part of that whole production increase. We know irrigation is really the most reliable prevention that we have globally for famine. So it is going to continue to play a sizable role to meet the food demands that are coming from an increasing population. And really that's because irrigation offers production stability in quality and high yields on irrigated land. So that's the biggest benefits. But we do know, and I think we've all touched on it in our various answers today, that there's going to be continued changes and more extreme climate events that are going to be seen, particularly in southern Alberta. So we really need to think now about adaptation options that we can start to consider and move towards in order to enhance water management and enhance the system in southern Alberta so that we can continue to have the water security that we've had over the past 120 years here in southern Alberta. And there's a project that's wrapping up that utilized the South Saskatchewan River operational model. The final report should be out within days, and it really looked at how we can find some strategic options when we look at future economic development and population growth in the South Saskatchewan River region. And the main outcome of that project is really an adaptation roadmap that details potential infrastructure, policy, and water management change options that really should be considered and implemented in order to strengthen our water security in the face of a changing climate.
Great. Pam, how is the City of Calgary planning for the future?
Well, first of all, we're even though we've done a lot of great work in the past, we still have to make sure that our thinking isn't just that water availability is like a check mark in a planning process, or only needing a drought response in a short-term crisis. We're continuing that sort of long-term planning, casting our eyes forward to be as proactive as possible. We know that water availability is changing, and to Margot and Mark's point, we have to work collaboratively with all of the users in the watershed. But it helps us as a large city answer that question of like what it means to be a water utility provider. We right now provide water for more than 1 in 3 Albertans growing, potentially in a water scarce region. And how does a big city like Calgary need to adapt? The water security roadmap that I spoke about earlier helps us plan for that long term, looking at whether ensuring really that there'll be enough water to meet the needs of our customers, but also the environment and the economy in both the short, medium, and long term. And we're talking about long-term planning, and so our project is actually looking out to the year 2100. And so I was reflecting on that, thinking, well, that sounds like a long, long ways in the future, but actually backcasting that back, it really means, it's the same time span as the 1950s to now. So it's really not all that long when you say long-term planning. So we want to make sure that the City of Calgary knows which water security levers we should use and when. And I've already sort of touched on these, but just to sort of recap, we're really looking at water conservation and efficiency to reduce that overall water use, using fit-for-purpose water to diversify our supply, and still underscoring the importance of watershed scale options that Margot was talking about, those different adaptation strategies for the future that include storage reservoirs upstream in our changing climate. And I also just kind of wanted to end on sort of grateful that other water users in the basin, the irrigation districts, agencies like Alberta Innovates, which are funding this research, are leaning into that collaborative framework to plan for the future. Knowledge mobilization is a really big part of our project. We're going to take all the learnings that we've got and share them with other municipalities in the region, and acknowledge that local scale solutions that we're looking at, those wider watershed scale solutions, are all needed to have a water secure future for Albertans.
Amazing. Mark, I guess you'll get the last word, at least for this part of proceedings. What's the biggest priority for Alberta Innovates going forward?
Yeah, thanks. And maybe I'll build on my previous, actually, in fact, I'd say irrespective of my previous analogy, we know, for one, that innovation is only useful if it's put to use. And so one of our big priorities right now in our water innovation program, and frankly across the organization, is to accelerate adoption of the innovation that's being catalyzed and advanced by Alberta Innovates and Innotech Alberta, and maximize the impact of our work and the work that we're supporting that others are doing as well. Another big priority for us right now, which interestingly enough, the broad perspective I talked about and the cross-sectoral, cross-disciplinary nature of Alberta Innovates lends itself to, is looking for opportunities at the intersections of different areas, like energy and agriculture. A quick shout out to Bill Whitelaw, who's put together an agriculture and energy group to think about intersectional opportunities there. Water and agriculture, water and energy, and the list goes on. So by looking at these intersections, we can identify and have had the opportunity to identify some pretty amazing innovation that might otherwise slip through the cracks because they're not at the core of one particular area. And then when it comes to water and drought, we want to continue building the House of Alberta to be resilient in the face of disasters, because I can assure you, and we've talked about this a lot, that this isn't the last drought that we'll face in the province of Alberta. And frankly, wildfires and drought and flooding and other disasters are a lot more interrelated than people might immediately recognize. Just as a quick example, we know that severe drought leads to worse wildfires because we don't have the moisture, we don't have the precipitation. Well, severe wildfire seasons can also in turn make some watersheds or areas, topography, more susceptible to flooding. And then furthermore, both wildfires and flooding for that matter, and drought, of course, all pose ongoing challenges for water treatment and providing clean, safe water to residents and to municipalities. So we want to make sure that we have effectively more tools in our toolkit and resilience built into the province to maintain healthy aquatic ecosystems, to withstand the impacts of climate change, and frankly, disasters that are completely unrelated to climate change as well.
Great. Thanks, Mark. I'm going to just see if we've got some questions from the audience. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, and we'll see if we have time to get to them. The first one that I have, I think, is sort of for everybody. Comes with a comment first. Excellent considerations for municipal and irrigation demands. What about the natural environment? Margot is off mute, so I will let her go first.
Good question. And I guess I'd preface it with, we do obviously have a water licensing system and a regulatory system in Alberta. And that system and those licenses do take into consider the natural environment. There are in-stream flow objectives that have to be met, and I can tell you that there is a consideration for the natural environment at any time during, I would say, what is our Alberta system, and that is collaborative water management. Most people probably don't understand that in the SSRB, the major water license holders, even in an average year of water supply, hold weekly meetings where they talk about the needs of the license holders as well as the needs of the natural environment, and they manage their diversions based on the demands coming in, and always are keeping a cognizant eye on what's happening with the flow in the river. And some of those license holders in the past voluntarily reduce their diversions in order to ensure that the inflow objectives are being met in our rivers. And we saw that particularly last year when the hot weather really started, and we saw freshet that ended up being probably 3 weeks earlier than normal. That we did see irrigation districts that immediately started rationing their on-farm allocations to their irrigators because they reduce their diversions in order to ensure that the criteria under their licenses related to in-stream flows below diversion points were being met. So it's something that's always discussed, and it's I would say being managed in real time throughout any summer season.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in on that one quickly as well, because
go for it.
the question is astute in that we haven't talked a lot about natural environment in this conversation, and it's not that it takes a back seat or that it's not impact as well. And I guess what I can say to that, in addition to what Margot talked about, is that there is a lot of really good research and attention being paid to the natural environment. We have really healthy, and we have important aquatic ecosystems and watersheds in the province of Alberta. And so I can even just quickly from an Alberta Innovates perspective, Alberta Innovates is not the only organization working in this area, but from our perspective, we have both funding programs as well as applied research happening in the natural environment ecosystem as well, related to, of course, water at a broad level, but land and biodiversity and the interplay of aquatic ecosystems on the natural environment. So there's a lot of really good work happening within Alberta Innovates and elsewhere.
Amazing.
And I'll jump in too, and
jump
just say
in.
that exactly, like we were really focusing on sort of the really high, very focused water kind of tools. But as part of our drought resilience plan, we actually have a goal of protecting and maintaining and enhancing healthy landscapes. So we recognize that natural environment is really important for drought mitigation for the city of Calgary. And we have lots of different programs, our Riparian Action Program, that are helping to protect those areas. Our new city plan is looking at our ecological network. So there's lots of great stuff that's going to be coming forward to recognize that our natural environment is a key component of providing drought resiliency as well into the future. I know it's tough in a very sort of acute way when you're managing these riparian restoration projects, when there isn't as much access to the water, but we're working with those project managers to see what we can do to support them. As a city, we do have, wanting to see other ways of accessing water for the establishment period of certain projects, landscape projects, overall, because we know that in the future they offer such good resiliency benefits long term.
Great. And I think we have time for one more question. And this one takes in a bit of a different direction. How will this impact smaller businesses in Alberta? I can see Mark leaning forward, so maybe I'll let him go first.
Sure. Yeah.
Or I've put him on the spot, one of the two.
Either way, I can talk for a minute here. And I don't have a really good answer because it's an important question, and I think I'm glad the question was asked, and it will undoubtedly have an impact. But I think the impact will be very distributed depending on where they are in the province, depending on how dire the situation becomes in terms of water availability this summer. But there's no question that there are small businesses that don't have large margins, for example, that will be stressed by this, particularly those that have processes or businesses that are relatively water intensive. I don't want to make that sound like a bad thing, but that use water in their businesses. And so, it's not a really clear answer, but unquestionably, and I think one of the primary points I would like to make, and we talked about watershed modeling and we talked about research that's ongoing right now. What's important is that we have the information to be able to equip ourselves to make decisions into the future. And so my hope is that I like to take an optimistic approach or an optimistic standpoint and say that my hope is that through the resiliency that we've already built into the system and through the collaboration that we've talked about on this call, that we can find ways to make sure water gets to those critical needs, and that, unlike some other disasters, businesses don't have to go under and have to suffer irreparable consequences because of this.
Thanks, Mark. Does anyone else have anything to add?
I guess I'll jump in and say, for looking at sort of a drought condition, the city sort of it has looking to the outdoor water use really through our water utility bylaw, really trying to reduce that first and foremost. And then working with businesses sort of in a voluntary way to find efficiencies. They know their business best, and that's where we're encouraging efficiencies, leak detection, all that type of thing. First and foremost, looking at outdoor water use so that we can continue to sort of protect that economy that we need to in a drought as well.
Great. Margot.
Yeah, I was just going to add, and I think Pam touched on it, but there's been really great work over the last couple of decades from all the water using sectors in Alberta on conservation, efficiency, and productivity. And though for some sectors, the ability to innovate and gain more water efficiency, the gap might be closing a little bit. There's still opportunity for additional innovation, and saving water through innovation is a really good way to continue to introduce water security, especially in places where you may be seeing more extremes because of climate change, and it really is the right thing to do.
Thank you. I think that is all the time we have for questions. Thank you very much for everyone who asked them. There's a bunch of great ones in here, and I wish we had a bit more time. But I want to take a moment to thank all the panelists today for taking part in this discussion. We will make this recording available later next week and via all of our channels, so you can look it up, and please feel free to share it. But yes, thanks again to all of you for coming, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.